Picture the executioner in your mind, right now. Go on, I'll wait. You're seeing a hulking brute in a dark hood, aren't you? A faceless monster, swinging an axe with mindless cruelty. That's the Hollywood lie, and it's time we shatter it. The truth is so much more fascinating, and so much more disturbing. The medieval executioner wasn't some random thug pulled from the gutter. Oh no, he was a state-appointed professional, a civil servant, with a pension. He was one of the most complex, paradoxical figures in the entire dark tapestry of the Middle Ages. A necessary pillar of society, integral to the very concept of law and order. And yet, he was forced to live in exile, utterly reviled by the very community that paid his salary. We all picture the hooded figure with an axe, but the truth about his wealth and social status, it's bizarre. Subscribe, hit the bell, because what you're about to hear will change everything you think you know. Now think about this, the sheer cognitive dissonance of his existence. This man had to possess the precise, steady hands of a master craftsman. A botched beheading wasn't just messy. It could spark a full-blown riot in the town square. So he practiced relentlessly. He was a technician of death, and for this essential grisly service, he was on the government payroll, earning a good steady wage, sometimes even granted a plot of land. But here's the catch, the gut-wrenching paradox. He was legally mandated to live outside the city walls, often near the gallows itself. His touch was considered so spiritually unclean, so cursed, that if he brushed against you in the market, you might have to see a priest. People believed. His very shadow could blight a crop. So you had this man, this wealthy, skilled official, who was also the ultimate social pariah, living in a state of permanent quarantine. But to truly understand the profound strangeness of his life, we first need to uncover the unbelievable economic power he wielded from the shadows. So he was an outcast, but a wealthy one, and you have to ask yourself, how? How did a man, paid a government salary, become so notoriously rich? The answer lies in the grotesque, hidden economy of death that he controlled. This wasn't just a job, it was a franchise. His most immediate perk, a rite known as jus speti, the law of the sword. It meant that everything within the reach of his blade on the scaffold belonged to him. Everything. The clothes off the condemned's back, the coins in their pocket, the jewellery they wore, even the rope used to hang them. He'd literally stand there after an execution, collecting his grisly payment from the still warm body. It was a macabre form of tipping, but that was just the loose change. The real fortune was in the body itself, because in the eyes of the law, the corpse was his property, and every single part of it was a commodity. This is where it gets deeply unsettling. The fat, a substance grimly known as human grease, or manche, was carefully rendered and sold in buckets to apothecaries. They used it as a base for ointments and salves, promising miracle cures. People were literally rubbing executed criminals into their sore muscles. The blood, believed to hold incredible medicinal power. Epileptics would crowd around the scaffold, cups in hand, desperate to drink it warm, believing it could stop their seizures. The executioner, he'd sell it by the vial. And then there was the straight-up black magic. A hanged man's hand, the hand of glory, was a sought-after talisman for thieves. A fragment of bone could be a potent good luck charm. He was a one-stop shop for superstition, supplying the very dark arts the church claimed to despise. And if that wasn't enough, his secluded home, forced upon him by his pariah status, became the perfect place for a side business, one no one else could run, a tavern and a brothel, operating on the edge of town, away from prying eyes. He was a bartender, a pimp, and a death merchant, all rolled into one. This grotesque economy made him rich, but it came at a soul-crushing cost, a life of isolation and psychological torment that would break most people. So he had all this money, but what good is wealth when you are utterly untouchable, literally? The executioner's gold bought him nothing in the currency of respect. He and his family lived in a social leper colony, a gilded cage of pure, unadulterated dread. Imagine the rules. By law, no one was permitted to touch him. Not a handshake, not a pat on the back, nothing. If he accidentally brushed against someone in the street, that person might have to undergo a ritual cleansing. His very presence was a contaminant. He was banned from entering churches, denied salvation. He was barred from public markets, so someone else had to buy his food. He couldn't even enter a tavern for a drink. And if he did, if he somehow managed to get served, the moment he left, every single mug, every bottle his unclean lips had touched, would be gathered up and shattered on the spot. His money was good, but his person was poison, and the horror didn't end with him. It was hereditary. His children were born into this curse. They inherited the stigma at birth. They couldn't play with other children. They couldn't go to school. And when it came time to marry, their options were brutally limited by law. They could only marry the children of other unclean professions, the gravediggers who handled rotting corpses, the town criers who delivered news of death, the latrine cleaners who wallowed in human waste. That was their dating pool. Generation after generation trapped in this doomed social class. So picture it. A man returns home to his large house after a day's work. He's wealthy. He's powerful. He's a master of his gruesome craft. And he is completely, utterly, soul-crushingly alone. He lives in a prison of his own making, wealthy but utterly isolated, which makes you wonder, what kind of man actually chooses this life? The crushing truth is, for most of these men, there was no choice. There was no moment where they decided to pick up the axe. The job picked them. This wasn't a career path. It was a bloodline, a family curse passed down like a genetic disease from father to son. There was no escape from the family business. Imagine being born into that. Your last name is synonymous with death. Your playground is the shadow of the gallows. From the moment you could walk, you were being groomed, trained. Your little hands weren't given toys, they were given tools. The psychological impact is almost too dark to fathom. You weren't raised to create. You weren't raised to build or to heal. You were raised from birth to maim, to torture, to kill. And the training? It started obscenely young. It was methodical, brutal. They wouldn't start on people, of course. First, it was animals. Practicing the precise swing needed to decapitate a dog or a sheep with a single blow, learning the anatomy, hardening the heart. But that was just the warm-up. The real training came with human corpses, the bodies of those they executed, or those dug up from fresh graves, became their textbooks. They would practice their cuts, their strikes, learning exactly how much force was needed to sever a head, to break a joint on the wheel, to open a body without hitting a major artery too quickly. This was their childhood. This was their normal. And yet, within this nightmare, there was still humanity. Take Franz Schmidt, one of the most famous executioners in history. For 45 years, in the 16th century Nuremberg, he carried out his grim duties, and he kept a diary. A detailed, chilling diary. He didn't just list names. He noted the crimes, the methods, and sometimes a quiet note of pity. The poor sinner, he called them. He wrote of praying with them, of offering a kind word before the blow fell. Here was a man, trapped in his inherited fate, somehow still holding on to a shred of his soul amidst the carnage. And that training, it wasn't just about strength, it wasn't just about precision. To stay employed, an executioner had to master a horrifying catalogue of pain, each method more creative, more brutal than the last. But this was the core of his profession. This was his craft and his toolbox, a museum of horrors. An executioner wasn't just a guy with an axe. He was a master of a dozen different, terrifyingly specific trades, each one designed to deliver a unique flavour of agony and death. His skill wasn't just about killing. It was about controlling the exact experience of dying. Take the simple beheading. You think it's just a swing. It was a precise surgical strike. The axe was heavy, incredibly heavy. The angle had to be perfect. A clean strike meant a quick, merciful death and a satisfied crowd. But a botched job, a blow that only half severed the neck, that required multiple bloody chops. That could turn the crowd into a furious mob that would tear the executioner limb from limb. The pressure was unimaginable. Then there was hanging, but not the long drop that breaks the neck. No, this was slow, strangling suspension. The executioner might have to climb the ladder himself, pull on the victim's legs to hasten the end, or let them choke for what felt like eternity. But the true masterpiece of suffering was hanging, drawing, and quartering. This wasn't execution. It was a multi-act play of pain. And the executioner, he was the director. First came the drawing. The victim was dragged, bound and broken to the place of death, then hanged, but not to die, cut down while still conscious. Then came the disembowelment, slicing open the abdomen, burning the organs before the victim's eyes, then the beheading, then the hacking of the body into 4 quarters. It was a logistical and psychological nightmare to perform. And his toolkit? It included instruments that were the stuff of pure nightmare fuel. The breaking wheel, where he would methodically shatter every major bone in a living person's body with an iron bar. The Judas cradle, a pyramid-shaped seat where a victim was slowly lowered, their own weight causing unimaginable tearing. The pair of anguish, a device inserted into orifices and then expanded to rip a person apart from the inside. His hands operated them all. His expertise was the only thing standing between a quick death and hours of unspeakable suffering. He wasn't just a killer, he was a conductor of pain, and his skill determined the symphony's length. But technical mastery with a blade was one thing. The real test, the mark of a true master executioner, was his ability to perform the one act considered more art than execution. A public spectacle so precise, so gruesome, that it could make even him shudder. And here we arrive at the most stunning, the most unbelievable paradox of it all. The very same hands that could expertly dismember a human body were also the town's most sought-after healers. Yes, the man who caused wounds was, secretly, the absolute best at fixing them. This is the climax of the executioner's bizarre existence. While university-trained physicians were busy studying ancient Greek scrolls and bleeding patients with leeches, the executioner, he was getting a hands-on postgraduate education in anatomy every single day. He knew the human body better than anyone alive. He knew how muscles connected, how bones broke, how blood flowed. He had seen it all, up close. So when a child fell from a tree and shattered an arm, who did desperate parents secretly seek out under cover of darkness? The executioner. He could set a bone with a precision no one else could match. when a festering wound wouldn't heal, who knew exactly how to clean it, which poultices worked, and which ones were useless superstition? The executioner. His knowledge of herbs, of practical medicine, often passed down through his own outlawed dynasty, was unparalleled. He was the unlicensed back-alley trauma surgeon of the Dark Ages. People would whisper about his healing powers, while staring at the ground, hoping never to make eye contact. They revered his skill, and yet were terrified of him. They needed his knowledge, but despised its source. They would beg for his help, then cross the street to avoid him the very next day. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. So the hand that could dismember a man with an axe could also miraculously set a child's broken arm. The mind that could calculate the exact force needed to break a man on the wheel could also diagnose a fever with stunning accuracy. He lived in a world of impossible contradictions. But this strange duality hides the executioner's darkest, most shocking secret, his own shattered psyche. Because how? How does a man compartmentalize this? How does he go from setting a bone to breaking one, from saving a life to taking one? The answer is a psychological toll so crushing. It's a miracle any of them could function at all. So how did he sleep at night? The truth is, he probably didn't. Or if he did, it was only after drinking himself into a stupor. We talk about the money, the power, the skills, but we've avoided the central horrifying question. What does constantly killing people do to a human mind? The psychological toll was catastrophic. These men were not psychopaths. They were craftsmen, fathers, neighbours. They were expected to be emotionally numb, to flip a switch, to turn off their humanity like a lamp. But you can't. You can't. There's a reason the term executioner's melancholy exists in the historical record. It was a recognised condition, a deep, profound depression that clung to these men like a shroud. Imagine the cumulative weight, not just one death, but hundreds, sometimes thousands, over a long, haunted career. And it wasn't always vicious criminals. Many were petty thieves, some were innocent, caught in a political or religious storm they never saw coming. And the executioner knew that. He spoke to them. He heard their last words. He saw the fear in their eyes. And then he had to look at their lifeless body later that day to practice his anatomy. The cognitive dissonance would be soul-crushing, and it didn't stop there. Every public execution was a high-stakes performance. A clean kill meant he got to live another day. A botched one. That could mean being torn apart by a furious crowd, so every time he stepped onto the scaffold, he was gambling with his own life. The stress must have been unbearable, so they drank, heavily. Historical records are full of accounts. Executioners were notorious alcoholics. It was the only coping mechanism they had, the only way to numb the horror, to quiet the screams echoing in their memory, to steady the hand that had to do it all again tomorrow. They lived in a permanent state of trauma, drowning their conscience just to survive the next day's work. They lived with horrors we can barely imagine, all to uphold the law. They were the blunt instrument of justice. But what happened when the law itself was the most monstrous thing of all? When the very system they served demanded not just execution, but prolonged sadistic torture in the name of God and state? What did that do to a man? But the king's justice was one thing. The church's, that was something else entirely. This is where the executioner's role shifted, from public servant to something far more sinister. During the horrors of the Inquisition, he wasn't just the state's tool, he became a priest's weapon, an instrument of divine punishment. The church, the very institution that banned him from its halls, that denied him salvation now sanctioned and directed his work. Priests and inquisitors stood at his side, giving orders. More pain here, a slower turn of the screw. There. The goal wasn't just to punish the body, it was to purify the soul. They truly believed they were saving people through torture. Forcing a confession of heresy was seen as an act of mercy, a last chance to repent before being burned at the stake and condemned to eternal hellfire. Now think about the moral conflict this must have unleashed inside the executioner. Torturing or killing a thief, a murderer, was one thing. But now, he was breaking people for a belief, a thought, a prayer whispered to the wrong God. He was inflicting unimaginable pain on people for their ideas. And the methods? They became custom-built for blasphemy. The tools were sanctified. The process was ritualized. It was a perverse form of worship, with agony as its liturgy. The executioner became the lead performer in a sacred play of suffering, all under the cold, approving gaze of the clergy. Caught between the wrath of the king and the fury of God, the executioner became the fulcrum upon which all medieval justice balanced. Damned if he did his job, damned if he refused. He was the physical manifestation of a society's darkest impulses, both royal and religious. And that impossible balance, that unbearable contradiction, created a legacy that still echoes in our language and our laws today. So how does a figure so deeply embedded in society, so essential to its very function, just vanish? The world began to change. The Enlightenment dawned, bringing with it radical new ideas about justice, cruelty, and the value of human life. The spectacle of public torture and execution began to be seen not as justice, but as barbarism. And the invention that truly sealed the executioner's fate was the guillotine. And the ultimate irony, it was created for a noble purpose, to make executions more humane, to create a perfect, painless, instant death, equal for all, noble and commoner alike. But in doing so, it stripped the executioner of his craft. He was no longer a master technician whose skill determined a good or bad death. He became a button puller, an anonymous technician. The machine was the star now. His other duties, the healing, the policing, the punishment, were slowly absorbed by a new, professionalized police force and the emerging prison system. The state took over completely. Death and punishment became bureaucratic, moved behind walls, away from the public eye. The role of the freelance death dealer, the outcast craftsman, became obsolete. They vanished from the public square, their macabre economy dismantled, their social exile ended not with acceptance but with simple, quiet erasure. They became a relic, a ghost story. They vanished from history's stage. But the archetype, that feared, isolated figure living on the edge of town, never left our imagination. We just found new names for him. In the end, the executioner was never the true monster. He was just the mirror. He reflected back the darkest parts of medieval society, its thirst for violence, its deep-seated superstitions, its breathtaking hypocrisy. He was the monster they made, a creature created by the community to perform the dirty work they all demanded, from the safety of the crowd, but could never, ever stomach doing themselves. We like to think we're more civilized now, but are we? We still outsource our violence. We just do it more cleanly. The drone pilot who delivers death from thousands of miles away. The anonymous technician who administers a lethal injection behind sterile glass. We still build systems that let us benefit from brutality, while shielding ourselves from the bloody reality. The face of the executioner has changed. But the uncomfortable psychological principle remains. we judge the past. But would we have been any different? If you have thoughts on that dark, unsettling question, share them in the comments below. And if you want to keep uncovering history's most disturbing secrets, hit subscribe and watch this next video, which just might be the most shocking one we've ever done.